Natural immunity is starting to be a growing conversation, or starting to be part of the growing conversation with COVID, thankfully. There's been some grimy stuff with the hashtag natural immunity coming from Instagram and blocking them, which is weird, but is it really, considering who owns it? But natural immunity, for the most part, seemed to never even be considered with any other policy direction of not just places in America, governments, be it the federal or local governments or the public health experts, but really all around the world. For example, you have natural immunity, and then you're being pressed to get jabbed, or being forced to get jabbed in some cases, coerced at least, despite you having already got COVID and recovered from it. Well, that's interesting. And we had that study that was in preprint coming out of Israel, more to come, that suggested that in comparison to the double vaxxed, the people that had antibodies, having recovered and been unvaxxed, so having completely natural immunity, their antibodies seem to be firing on all cylinders better than those that are, let's say, had the double jab. That, however, was never part of the conversation. Only now are certain public health experts, as being documented by Marty Makary Makary over here at the Washington Post, and he titles, "Natural immunity to COVID is powerful. Policy makers seem afraid to say so." Now, on that, we're going to read through a little bit of this, but I can tell you why they're afraid to say so. It's because that goes against what they have been leading with as the solution. And the solution has always been get jab, get jab, get jab. That's what it is. It can be nothing else. I mean, not talking about the temporary things like the masking and the social distancing and stuff. It's just been jab, 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 jab. Now there's something else that seems to not only work better, it's more so the way you look at it. And I know those of you guys that are going to be skeptical of this aren't going to even try to understand this. But look at it like this. A person is weighing his options. Let's say a young, healthy person is weighing his or her options. And you know that in the event that they get it, it is extremely unlikely a young, healthy, in shape person will die from COVID or be hospitalized for it alone. That's extremely unlikely. So that person may weigh out the options of getting, let's say, double vax, which is what they would need to get in order to be fully, let's say, vaccinated, as they say, and then they'll have to go for their boosters. But if that person looks and weighs those two options, it's not irrational for them to take, let's say, the second, or rather, the first of catching it and recovering from it, considering how less of a risk that they're taking. And it's completely rational because they're going to be better protected. All data seems to be pointing to that direction. The policymakers, of course, don't even want to consider that because that gets in the way. Look, some people they're gonna call it for what it is. There's no money in natural immunity, right? There ain't no money in that. There ain't no money in letting your immune system work. What was it like? Almost $20 billion or something Pfizer made? There ain't no money in that. They don't get that money in the event that people even consider, okay, let me just get it and I'll just recover from it. Or it ain't about getting it or trying to get it. It's more of if I get it, I get it, and I'll more than likely recover for it. I'd rather take that risk as opposed to maybe even having to be reliant, or having my immune system need to be reliant. It's almost like an addiction to constantly getting boosters because, you've basically already crossed that bridge. But what he had to say, he says it's okay to have an incorrect scientific hypothesis. I agree. I said that in my last segment. It's perfectly fine to be wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong, but why double down on your wrongness? But when new data proves it wrong, you have to adapt. Unfortunately, many elected leaders and public health officials have held on far too long to the hypothesis that natural immunity offers unreliable protection against COVID-19, a contention that has been rapidly debunked by science. More than 15 studies have demonstrated, and I've talked about this. We covered it. Great job. The guys over at The Blaze compiled that list of actual peer-reviewed, some in preprint, but most of them are actually peer-reviewed studies regarding the immunity of COVID-19. It's not unreliable. The data exists out there. They're just choosing to just ignore it. A 700,000 person study from Israel 2 weeks ago found that those who had experienced prior infections were 27 times less likely to get a second symptomatic COVID infection than those who were vaccinated. So what does that mean? We've already covered the study. You can go look at it. It's coming out of Israel. And you can also see, hell, even Walensky had to acknowledge it. She was like, well, our friends at Israel talking about natural immunity and all of that. It's saying that the people, or what the data seems to allude to, and that's a big sample size, by the way, but the data seems to say that people that get this are far more likely to that get it and recover, so naturally not vaxxed, are way more likely to not have a symptomatic COVID infection in comparison to, let's say, the folks that are fully vaccinated. This affirmed a June Cleveland Clinic study. We talked about this as well, of healthcare workers, in which none of them had previously tested positive for the coronavirus, got reinfected. The study authors concluded that individuals who have had SARS-CoV-2, and this is a quote from the study, infection are unlikely to benefit from COVID-19 vaccination. And in May, a Washington University study, we talked about that as well, found that even a mild infection resulted in long-lasting immunity. So the emerging science suggests that natural immunity is as good or better than vaccine-induced immunity. That's why it's so frustrating that the Biden administration has repeatedly argued that immunity conferred by vaccines is preferable to immunity caused by natural infection. As NIH Director Francis Collins told Fox News host Brett Baier a few weeks ago, that rigid adherence to an outdated theory is also reflected in Biden's recent announcement that large companies must require their employees to get vaccinated or submit to regular testing regardless of if they previously had the virus. Downplaying the power of natural immunity has had deadly consequences. In January, February, and March, we wasted scarce vaccine doses on millions of people who had previously had COVID. And the fact that people were okay with that, and nobody, now I won't say nobody questioned it, like nobody amongst, let's say, their circle said, maybe the people that have already recovered from the fucking, and considering how we already understand, let's say, sicknesses or illnesses of this kind, of the upper respiratory kind, and how they generally work, maybe vaccinating people that have already recovered doesn't make any fucking sense. But they still did it. This is not just hindsight 2020. Many of us were vehemently arguing and writing at a time for such a rationing strategy. One reason public health officials may be afraid to acknowledge the effectiveness of natural immunity is that they fear it will lead to some to choose getting infection over the vaccination. That's a legitimate concern. I say, what's the problem? Depending on who they are, what's the problem? Look, the reality is this. There are people that are going to die. Did you know that nobody makes it out on the other side alive? Did y'all know that? We don't live forever. Everything that you do throughout life assumes a risk. And maybe it's 9 out of the 10 people that do it will be fine, and one of the people that do it may not be fine. That's been a part of life. You got stairs installed in your house. You took a fucking risk. People die walking down the stairs every single year, slipping in the bathtub every single year. It happens. Yet we driving cars, right? And I ain't talking about like intoxicated. People die of car wrecks and all kinds of malfunctions and all sorts of things. It happens. It's a risk that you assumed, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that, though. Maybe people that's their risk that they want to assume, may start having fucking COVID parties like we used to do chickenpox when I was a kid. I don't think they do that anymore. They don't even do that anymore. Do people even get chickenpox anymore? But anyway, when I was a kid, we had chickenpox party. You heard that someone at the school fucking had fucking chickenpox? Man, the parents was rushing them kids over there like, we about to have a goddamn party, right? We about to have a goddamn party for this kid, and my kid will be there to get this shit and get it over with. Like, that's the shit we used to do when I was a kid, right? But there's a reason for that. It was like, all right, you get it, you're immune, you won't get it again. Maybe you got shingles and other shit you got to worry about down the line, but you get what it is that I'm saying, right? So while it may be a legitimate concern, I don't think it's as much to be worried about because it's a risk that is assumed by way of people that are assuming that risk, right? And especially if the vaccine worked like you said it was, you're not assuming any risk because you're protected. So you thought. So yeah, some people may say they are healthy, they are young, they're in shape, and they may say, shit, considering this information, I will choose natural immunity over getting the vaccine. That's not an irrational situation. He said, but we can encourage all Americans to get vaccinated while still being honest about the data. Like I say, why? Like, why encourage? I can understand encouraging them to get it if they're part of a vulnerable population, right? That's not saying that I would do that. I want to be clear. I'm not telling you to get the vaccine or not get it for that matter. But what I'm saying is that for someone that is of that age and health demographic that will, for the most part, have no problems, it's highly likely that they'll have no problems. Why encourage them to get it? Like when we talk about de Blasio worrying so much about trying to get people under the age of like 16 to get approved for this, or 12 or whatever the crazy age number is. It's like, why? Why are you trying to rush to get the people that are least vulnerable vaccinated? That doesn't make sense. Why? Definitely with the information. So I would even disagree with this concept that we can encourage all Americans to get vaccinated. Why would we want to even do that? If the data says, as you're saying, and as you're rightfully acknowledging, that natural immunity seems to even be better in terms of like symptomatic reinfection, why would a young, healthy person that is of low risk in the event that they get it choose to get vaccinated over that? That makes no sense. Yet, when asked the common question, I've recovered from COVID, is it absolutely essential that I get vaccinated? Many public health officials have put aside the data and responded with a synchronized yes, even as studies have shown that reinfections are rare and often asymptomatic or mild when they do occur. There's another part that he goes on about that we're going to be talking about in a different segment. So long your public health officials pretended that this data has not been available, and it has been. It's just inconvenient. That's all. It ain't that it wasn't there. It's inconvenient. For the Branch Covidians, it's inconvenient. They've been spending so long just telling people that this was the end-all solution. So it almost is as if they have to concede being wrong, or even so. Let's be honest with it, guys. Natural immunity is the default. I want to be clear on this. That's the default, not the vaccine. I know they like to use the term unvaccinated, but that's not the default. You have to go out of your way to do that, right? Your immune system doing what the immune system does is just that. So the default actually is natural immunity. You have to go out of your way to get vaccinated, right? So considering that is the default, when people are working through this, it's almost as if you are, if someone's weighing the options, it's almost as if you are, I don't want to use it in a way that suggests that you're damaging their immune system, right? What I will say is that person, as the data is pointing towards it, that was not vaccinated and recovered, is dealing with it better on average than those that were fully vaccinated when it comes to protection from reinfection. So you can assess that information in whatever way that you may. You just watched a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake. Catch us live at 12 p.m. throughout the week over at youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and follow us over at odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. If you want to watch the entire video cast after the show is over, just be sure to become a member on the YouTube channel. Of course, the full audio portion of the podcast is available for free on all major digital platforms, or just visit forcanonsake.com.